On the surface, Little Nightmares appears to be a fantasy horror game in which we assume the role of a young girl in a yellow raincoat known as Six. Throughout her adventure, Six makes her way through the depths of a prison known as the Maw. A grim environment full of grotesque, monstrous-looking humanoids before eventually facing off against a mysterious woman known simply as the Lady. But there is more to this game than meets the eye, and so in this video we take a look at the hidden meaning behind Little Nightmares, not theorizing so much about the story of the game, but rather what it all symbolizes, its deeper meaning. You see, game developers often design their stories as a political or social commentary, and I believe Little Nightmares is a metaphor for the child slave trade in third world countries, specifically sweatshops. What are sweatshops? These are factories designed to produce items such as clothing for more affluent first world countries at low costs. They employ child workers from a very young age to work long, hard hours for very little benefit, so their products can be sold overseas at low prices. These work conditions are often very poor and dangerous for the children involved. And while conditions are not as bad as they used to be, where children were often homeless and forced to live in workhouses simply to have a roof over their heads, they are still deplorable work environments. Of course, Little Nightmares may also touch on other aspects of slavery, such as human trafficking, but in order to stay focused, we'll use the sweatshop analogy for much of this video. So, with the basics explained, let's dive into this theory with a look at the world of Little Nightmares and the characters which inhabit it. Let us begin with a basic overview of the disgusting appearance of the game's enemy character designs. Each of the enemy's 6 encounters, from the jailer to the cooks to the lady herself upon removing her mask, and the bloated customers who board the ship to banquet, all have the same horrifying look. An easy explanation for this is simply because each of them have been involved in the exploitation of children for personal gain, and I'll go into detail on this later on. Their vile appearance symbolizes their wicked morals, sinful acts, and evil souls. It is a visual representation of all the atrocities they have committed. This also explains the mystery of the hanging man. Notice how he looks the most human out of everyone. This is because he has a conscience. He had a good soul at heart and could not stand being involved in the exploitation of these child workers any longer, and so he took his own life, thus retaining his human form. With this concept in mind, let us take a detailed look at the main events of the game and how they all feed into our theory for today. When we first load up the game, Six experiences a nightmare in which she sees a blurry vision of a lady in a white mask. She then wakes up in an impoverished setting, sleeping inside an old suitcase. This is our first piece of evidence to support today's theory. We see the ringleader of the slave trade and then transition right into a shot of a child waking up in a room which could easily represent a poor third world setting. Now, it's important to note that this is the beginning of Six's descent into hell, and this hell represents her years as a child surviving the horrors of slavery. Keep this in mind as we continue. It isn't long before Six comes across a room full of other children, all sleeping in very basic looking beds. This room looks strikingly similar to the sleeping quarters of an old orphanage or poorhouse. These kinds of places were used by factory owners to recruit children in order to exploit them for free labour, not just in third world countries, but all over the world many years ago. We have seen this represented in children's movies such as Don Bluth's An American Tail. We have further evidence this game may be a direct representation of work conditions for the poor during the 1930s or 1940s, as the footage shown on this television is an old black and white recording from that era. Add to that the fact that this room is monitored by a horrifying character known as the Jailer. He has an enormous grin, stretched out skin covering his eyes, and abnormally long arms. He literally represents the man responsible for the captivity of these children. The Jailer is responsible for keeping the children locked away and putting them to work each day, and we see this represented very clearly with this character in Little Nightmares. Next up, let's take a look at the strange all-seeing eyes. These are robotic eyes built into the walls that have the power to turn Six to stone if she is spotted by them. Again, there is a simple explanation for these eyes within the confines of this theory. Much like the Jailer himself, these eyes represent the fact that as a slave worker, children are always being closely watched, simply because many of them would try to escape on a daily basis. So this is the game symbolizing there is no escape for these children. They are either stolen or born into slavery and will be dealt with and repressed if they attempt to escape. As we escape the Jailer and move towards the kitchen area, Six lands in a giant pile of shoes. These shoes represent all the children who perished while slaving away in these workhouses, the lost souls who never made it to adulthood. This was very common, as previously mentioned. Workhouses were dangerous places where accidents would often occur and end up in fatalities. Many other children would simply die from years of exhaustion. These shoes represent this. The creature living beneath the shoes symbolizes the years of slavery, trying to pull Six down to an early grave, but she manages to escape such a fate. The cooks themselves all wear strange and disturbing looking masks, again representing their hideous actions. But these are not real cooks. They are presented as such in the game, but I believe they are symbolic themselves, instead representing the people who ran the workhouses and sweatshops directly. These were the people who put the children to work each day in order to create products for the wealthy. Products such as clothing and footwear. In one section, we literally use a meat grinder to create sausages for the fat cats who enter the ship for the feast. Meat that we can assume came from the children in the game. You may have heard the term before, being put through a meat grinder. The dictionary definition for this is a destructive action or process, so the meat grinder symbolizes the lives of the children at workhouses around the world who are literally worked to the bone, until they have nothing left to give. And of course the people responsible for this are the men and women who run these factories, in the case of Little Nightmares, the cooks themselves. Finally, let's move on to the two final sequences of the game. Six reaches the upper levels of the moor and sees hundreds of obese and deformed looking men and women boarding the ship for a vast banquet, overlooked by a mysterious masked woman known as the Lady. These customers are representations of the people benefiting from the slave trade, gouging themselves on products created by this corrupt system, a system that has caused so much pain and suffering to children around the world. They even try to reach out and grab Six and will eat her if they are successful. They are literally symbolizing the consumers of the first world, as they literally consume everything they can get their grubby hands on in the game. As for the lady herself, well, there's several points to touch on here. First of all, look to her mask. It hides a hideous face. As mentioned earlier, a face made hideous due to years of human exploitation. This woman is so evil, she cannot even look at her reflection in the mirror, as she would be disgusted by what she sees. This is why we see broken mirrors all over the game, and also why Six defeats her by using one. The lady is the symbol of the person at the top, the people in real life who pull the strings and control every aspect of the slave trade. She has built a business out of other people's suffering and gains both from the rich who buy her product and from the poor who live and die in captivity, existing only to work until they no longer can. We have proof of this in the game's DLC chapters, where we see the lady transforming one of the children into a gnome, a creature who is powerless and forever forced to live in the shadows. And these gnomes are also shown working to power machines throughout the game's DLC chapters. Also, it's interesting to note that her mask and appearance is similar to that of an ancient Japanese mistress. These were women who ran tea houses in feudal Japan. Geisha would work for their mistresses, often having to do unspeakable things to entertain the men who would frequent them, and these mistresses would profit off that. This is more evidence for our theory that the meaning behind the game is indeed that of human exploitation. But there is one final twist to this tale, and that is the evolution of our main character 6. One of the many tragic ends for a child working in the slave trade is not simply dying at a young age, but instead surviving many years of suffering and then becoming involved in the trade themselves as an adult, working their way up the ranks to become a master to future generations of kids and exploiting them the same way they were once exploited themselves. And so 6's journey throughout the game represents her survival of all of those years of torment as a child worker, but then also her rise to a position of power within the industry. Notice how each time she feeds, she becomes more powerful, but we also hear sinister, foreboding music, and the screen turns slightly red. Eventually, she even feeds on one of the children themselves. Of course, all of this is symbolizing 6's transformation to adulthood, where she transitions from child slave to slave master, taking over from the previous master, the lady. This explains why we see 6 sapping the life from the customers on the boat at the end of the game. She is profiting from them now, just as the lady did before. She now runs the show, and will transform into a disgusting looking creature over the years. 6 is the new lady, and the new slave master, fully corrupted after years of life imprisoned, being forced to work in deplorable conditions. As mentioned earlier, this is the hidden meaning behind Little Nightmares, but not the story of the game itself. I will be exploring theories to do with the game's characters and story directly in the future, but I believe this was the deeper meaning behind the game. Let me know your thoughts on this video in the comments section below. And that's it for today's video. Please remember to give it a like if you did enjoy watching, and maybe drop a comment too, as well as subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you never miss an upload. This channel specializes in variety horror content, including creepypasta readings, horror gaming facts and theories, and general interest pop culture horror videos. So if you're interested in all things spooky, you'll find something to enjoy here at SuperHorrorBro. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next video.